Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Whitney Costers, Professor of English, and today we're going to dive into one of Herman Melville's most fascinating short stories, Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street. Now, this is a story that definitely leaves a lot of readers scratching their heads, like what is going on with Bartleby, why does he refuse to work, and why is the lawyer, the narrator, so obsessed with him? It is a strange and unsettling story, to be sure, but if we look at it through Marxist literary criticism, it becomes a powerful critique of capitalism, labor, and human alienation. But before we get started, let me know in the comments, have you ever had a job that made you feel like a machine? Maybe a job where you felt disconnected, like you were just going through the motions without any real purpose? If so, you are going to relate to this story on a whole new level. And if you enjoy knowledge that makes you think and helps you relate your life to literature, be sure to check out some of my other videos after this one and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on any future discussions. I do upload videos weekly. Now, I'm going to discuss Bartleby through the lens of Marxist literary theory, but please know that this is just one way to interpret this story. Always keep an open mind when you're reading literature to find your best meaning. Now, Marxist criticism looks at how economic and social systems shape literature. Karl Marx argued that capitalist societies divide people into two main groups, the bourgeoisie, or the wealthy class who own businesses and control resources, and the proletariat, or the working class people who sell their labor for wages. One of Marx's biggest concerns was alienation, the idea that capitalism makes workers feel disconnected from their jobs, from each other, and even from themselves. Instead of finding meaning in their work, they just repeat the same tasks over and over, benefiting someone else while feeling like they're just another part of the machine. This idea of alienation is at the heart of Bartleby the Scrivener. From the very beginning, Melville signals that this is a story about capitalism. The subtitle is literally a story of Wall Street. This immediately tells us that we're dealing with a world that revolves around money, contracts, and business. The law office where Bartleby works is not some creative or fulfilling place. It exists solely to protect the private property of the wealthy. The workers there, including Bartleby, are not inventing anything, expressing themselves, or engaging in meaningful work. They are copying legal documents all day long, endlessly reproducing words that don't matter to them. There's nothing personal, nothing human about it. Now, think about a time when you had to do a repetitive, mindless task. Maybe it was data entry, scanning barcodes at a checkout counter, or following the same steps in a job that never changed. Or imagine working in a factory where your only job is to seal a box. You stand at a conveyor belt, sealing box after box for hours at a time. The task never changes, and your movements become automatic, and after a while, you feel more like a machine than a person. That feeling, that disconnection, is exactly what Karl Marx was talking about when he described alienation, and it's exactly what we see in Bartleby. Keep in mind that we only know Bartleby through the lawyer's point of view. Bartleby is silenced throughout this entire story. He lacks agency even in a story exclusively about him. And remember the title, Bartleby the Scrivener. Bartleby is defined and identified exclusively by his work. Now, at first, Bartleby does his job, and notably, the lawyer tells us that he writes on silently, palely, and mechanically. It's clear that work is a dehumanizing force here. It contradicts the promise that every human has the right to pursue happiness and the Christian demand of unconditional brotherhood. But then something shifts in Bartleby. One day when the lawyer asks him to perform a task, Bartleby says, "I would prefer not to." That line is so famous because it's so strange, but also because it's incredibly powerful. Bartleby doesn't argue. He doesn't explain himself. He just opts out. This moment is where the story moves beyond a simple workplace drama and becomes something much bigger. Bartleby is doing something radical. He's refusing to participate in a system that has stripped his job and his life of meaning. Bartleby's refusal can be seen as a reflection of modern alienation, both in terms of labor and human connection. He is a man confronting the absurdity of existence, refusing to engage in a world that offers him no meaning. His preference not to do something suggests that he still has agency. He's not coerced, he's not unable to work, He simply chooses not to, which makes his refusal all the more incomprehensible to those around him. Here, Melville reminds us that those who are less equal may still refuse the help of the more fortunate and may refuse to help those become more fortunate. And even when he is taken to prison, he continues his passive resistance. He stops eating, effectively choosing his own slow death rather than submitting to a world that he finds meaningless. The final revelation that Bartleby once worked in the dead letter office, a place where lost and undelivered letters go to be destroyed, is deeply symbolic. Like the letters, Bartleby himself is lost, discarded, and ultimately forgotten by the world. His position throughout is that he's entitled to perfect privacy as well as self-determination, even though he's economically subordinate. And as I alluded to earlier, what makes his resistance so unsettling, so strange, so confusing, is that it's wholly passive and emotionless, like the way a machine would respond. He doesn't rebel in the way we typically expect characters to rebel in literature or in life. He doesn't lead a protest, he doesn't rally others, he doesn't even make a case for himself and explain his decision. He just refuses. This kind of resistance is deeply existential. It mirrors ideas found in the works of Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, and later existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, and it prefigures later historical figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who advocated nonviolent resistance as a way of challenging power structures. Now, of course, Bartleby's resistance is existential rather than political, but the effect is similar. He disrupts the system simply by refusing to play along. Now, of course, the lawyer, who's also the narrator of the story, doesn't know how to handle this. He is a businessman, an employer, someone who benefits from the work of others. And yet, he sees himself as kind and generous. He prides himself on treating his employees well, but when we look closer, his kindness always serves his own interests. Remember, at one point he says of Bartleby, "Poor fellow, he means no mischief. He's useful to me. I can get along with him. If I turn him away, the chances are he'll fall in with some less indulgent employer, and then he will be rudely treated, and perhaps driven forth miserably to starve. Yes, here I can cheaply purchase a delicious self-approval. To befriend Bartleby, to humor him in his strange willfulness, will cost me little or nothing, while I lay up in my soul what will eventually prove a sweet morsel for my conscience." Think about a time when someone did something nice for you, but you could tell it was really about them and not you. That's exactly what's happening with the lawyer. He likes to think of himself as charitable, but when Bartleby refuses to comply, the lawyer's so-called generosity starts to crumble. Now, at first, the lawyer is patient with Bartleby because, as we said earlier, he's useful to him. His efficiency as a scrivener benefits his business. But when Bartleby stops working altogether, the lawyer begins to see him as a problem that needs solving, and his actions become increasingly self-serving. His offers of money and commands to leave are not genuine attempts to understand or help Bartleby, but rather efforts to absolve himself of responsibility. Even when the lawyer relocates his entire office just to escape Bartleby, his lingering guilt reveals his struggle to reconcile his self-perception as a benevolent employer with his inability to meaningfully engage with Bartleby's suffering. Instead of confronting the deeper existential crisis that Bartleby embodies, the lawyer fixates on justifying his choices, convincing himself that he's done all he reasonably could. His transactional approach to problem solving blinds him to Bartleby's true needs. And let's be honest, how do you think the lawyer would have reacted had Bartleby actually explained his position? When Bartleby is imprisoned, the lawyer's final attempt at intervention, hiring someone to bring him better food, is emblematic of his inability to see beyond material solutions. He assumes that nourishment is the issue because it's something tangible, something that can be resolved with money. But Bartleby's withdrawal is not about physical sustenance. It's about emotional and social alienation. The lawyer cannot recognize this because doing so would force him to confront uncomfortable questions about his own role in a system that disregards human suffering. And this is one of the most brutal critiques of capitalism in the entire story. Even people who want to be good, who think they are good, are still operating within a system that prioritizes self-interest over real human connection. Melville doesn't go after the obvious villains of the system, like the ruthless, greedy, and exploitative. He's showing us how even those who see themselves as compassionate are ultimately bound by the system in which they operate. And capitalism, at its core, is about efficiency and productivity. Every person is valued in relation to their ability to contribute to the system. And let's not forget the other employees, Turkey, Nippers, and Ginger Nut. They're almost like caricatures, and they are behaviorally mechanical. They operate like clockwork, literally. Even Nipper's irritability and nervousness occurs always in the morning, while Turkey's paroxysms start at noon. And even though they are eccentric, they have all generally conformed to the lawyer's expectations and the routines of the office. None of them have meaningful interactions with one another beyond their work. They exist in the same space, but they don't truly connect. Bartleby's passive resistance forces them to confront their own emptiness, but rather than engaging with the discomfort, they all just turn away. The unsettling nature of Bartleby the Scrivener lies in the fact that there is no clear resolution. The story doesn't tell us what to think. It simply presents Bartleby's refusal and leaves us to grapple with its implications. Why does he refuse? Is it depression? Is it a philosophical stance? Is he trying to expose the absurdity of the system? The story refuses to give us an answer, which is what makes it so powerful. In many ways, Bartleby is a warning. He represents what happens when a person becomes completely detached from the world, when work, relationships, and even survival itself lose their meaning. His refusal forces us to ask questions about ourselves. Are we simply going through the motions of life? Are we working jobs that have stripped us of meaning? Are we, like the lawyer, comforting ourselves with the illusion of kindness rather than confronting the uncomfortable truths about us? Now, throughout the story, Bartleby is described in ghostly, almost supernatural terms. He is pale, silent, and passive like a walking corpse. The lawyer even questions whether he's fully human, as if he's already dead in some way. This reinforces the idea that Bartleby represents the living dead produced by capitalism. Workers who are still physically present, but emotionally and spiritually drained by meaningless labor. And by the end of the story, Bartleby dies alone, huddled against a prison wall. The final image is devastating because it suggests that those who cannot fit into the system, who refuse to conform, are simply discarded. They don't get help, they don't get saved, they get erased. And what does the lawyer do? He walks away. And this is what makes Bartleby the Scrivener such a powerful and relevant story even today. The same structures that dehumanize Bartleby still exist. People still work jobs that leave them feeling alienated and disconnected. The gap between the wealthy and the working class is still enormous, and well-meaning people still struggle to balance compassion with self-interest. So, as readers, we have to ask ourselves, are we Bartleby refusing to participate in a system that makes us feel like machines? Or are we the lawyer, someone who sees injustice but ultimately chooses to walk away? This is why I love to read and teach literature, because it connects us to our humanity. It gives us a space to explore difficult questions about ourselves and our world, questions that we often ignore or minimize because they make us uncomfortable. Through literature, though, I think we can confront these issues with greater openness, gaining insight and understanding in ways that may otherwise feel inaccessible. Please do share your ideas and comments about this story below, and be sure to check out some of my other videos. Until the next one, be well.